So I'm really excited to welcome our Art and Identity panel to the stage. This panel will be featuring Gabriella Canal and Michael Fearon from Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism, Lloyd Burkhalter from School of the Art Institute in Chicago, Nailah Barnes from Spelman College, and Michael Flores, Solis, and Fida Yamani, another team from Columbia Graduate School of Journalism. So let's all welcome them with another round of applause.
Hi, everyone. My name is Gabby Canal.
And my name is Michael Fearon.
And we're both documentary filmmakers and journalists. My work is usually centered around identity and belonging.
And I gravitate towards telling stories about people engaging with the natural world in dynamic ways.
And this is our documentary short film, Seasons.
Our film Seasons documents the challenges of sustaining a small, family-run farm in New Jersey through the eyes of 60-year-old Korean immigrant and farm owner, Nailah No, and her 27-year-old daughter, Uni Park. Nailah is hoping that Uni will carry on her legacy and take over the farm. However, Uni, whose Korean-American upbringing informs her perception of this responsibility, is hesitant. The two attempt to reconcile their estranged relationship through collaboration on the land. Ultimately, the main question of our film becomes, will Uni take over the farm?
But the story didn't always start that way. It evolved. And when I began reporting in October 2020, I was initially interested in exploring the dynamics behind who owns and operates American farmlands and the unique challenges that people of color may face in trying to own that land. And so I found that it was a quite staggering dichotomy here. Today, people of color hold only 2% of all agricultural land in the US, according to the last census. I noticed that I wasn't seeing any stories of people of color in positions of power in the agricultural space. And so I set out to look for someone who was maybe at the beginning of their path to farm ownership. I reached out to advocacy groups and farm incubator programs, and I was learning a great deal about the complicated history of racism in our food system, but I still wasn't meeting any actual farmers, so I just went to New York City's farmers market one day, and that's where I met the central participant in our film, Nailah No.
So at that point, we began visiting Bodie Tree Farm, which is the name of the farm in New Jersey that Nailah No runs. And we immediately noticed a bunch of different narrative threads that we could potentially pursue. One of them was looking into the farm hands who came from all over the world to work on the farm. Another option was looking into the science behind farming, and that was a story that we were curious to tell. But ultimately, after visiting the farm many times and capturing hours and hours of footage and reviewing that footage, we kind of came to the conclusion that the most compelling narrative was the interpersonal dynamics between the family that runs the farm.
Yeah, we wanted to show the complexities and the beauty of this relationship in the context of legacy, of expectations, and all in an untraditional setting. So here's a glimpse of our film.
Did you make these trenches? You're a genius. Such a good idea. $95. But you also just did this. You did a lot of heart work at one time. You're not bringing that over there. Mom, you're like so old. Bye.
So we're going to do this 3 times in season.
Should we mark it down?
No,
I'll write it down somewhere where we did this today on the calendar.
it's all in my head.
That's not how we're doing this here. I'm not coming on your emotional roller coaster with you this year of when to do something or not. Should I do one more parsley?
At least 3 parsley, because they're not all going to make it.
She keeps letting me run this part of the farm and letting me do the herbs and make my own money. So I have 20 different herbs this year. I think I'm in over my head.
So you could tell about people's personality by how they work, how they move. You could tell a lot about them by the way they...
What do you think my personality is, Mom? What do you think I am based on my movements?
You know, certain things you have to keep it as a no comment. So,
Definitely some verbal sparring going on there. So we ran into a number of challenges, as one does making a documentary film. Some of the biggest challenges that we faced were continued access and just maintaining trust with the family. We had to visit the farm well over a dozen times, and we wanted to strike a balance between giving them space to operate and run their farm. You know, it's an extremely challenging industry with razor-thin margins. And we didn't want to disrupt that, yet we knew we had to be on the farm for pivotal, sometimes stressful moments in order to make a compelling film. And so at one point, we actually took a month break from visiting the farm, which gave us a chance to review our footage and gather our thoughts. And that was really, really helpful, and it enabled us to return to the farm energized, and it helped to maintain trust with the family. And throughout this process, we were always listening, always respecting their wishes, and giving space and showing kindness when necessary.
Just a little bit more in process. So we approached each shoot with an idea of what we wanted, and so from that we created a schedule and something called a shot list, but we knew we weren't going to get everything we wanted. Actually, we had to be really flexible for when things deviated, and we found that those moments actually made for the best scenes, usually. But at least having a structure ahead of time really helped give us some peace of mind and a framework to work in. And then over the year of filming, we also edited scenes in real time. This was to help us keep tabs on where the story was going and really just feel out what felt most memorable to us. We were lucky to have a community of people that gave really thoughtful feedback, and a community of people that really helped us get across the finish line, like the Pulitzer Center. But contrary to popular belief, when you think you're done with the film and you hit export, you're not actually done with the film yet.
Which brings us to distribution. We saw 2 primary avenues for distributing this film. One was the film festival circuit, and the other was partnering with a digital distributor. So we thought really critically about the types of film festivals that we wanted to apply to. We didn't just apply to any festival. And ultimately what we decided to do was apply to festivals that had an environmental focus, festivals that spoke specifically to the Asian American community, as well as festivals that were located geographically in the tri-state area, because this is a tri-state area story. And when it came to partnering with the digital distributor, we were aware that The New Yorker had an ongoing documentary series of cinematic character-driven stories, which is very similar to what we had made. And so we reached out and applied to their series, and very fortunately for us, our film was a really good fit for what they had slated. And so that ended up working out really well, and that's how we partnered with The New Yorker.
So just final thing, if it hasn't been made clear before, our main takeaway is that making a doc film is incredibly challenging, especially when you're trying to film real life in real time with real people. But the key is to just remain open-minded about your story changing, remain flexible with your participants, and really just continue to show up. That's the most important part. And on a more personal level, I think Michael and I walked away with a greater appreciation of where our food comes from and a greater appreciation for our moms. And we hope it can do the same for you too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name's Lily. I'm a writer and textile artist and a recent graduate of the School of the Art Institute of Chicago's MFA in Creative Writing. Coming from this museum background, I've been able to take part in a long overdue critical discussion about how sub-Saharan art has been evaluated from a Western perspective and thus fundamentally misunderstood. Much of my work revolves around the structural and conceptual similarities between weaving and writing, cloth as code, language as a system, material culture, and textile narratives. So one dimension of this in non-art world speak is how textiles function across cultures as a kind of language. I'm particularly interested in how traditional West and Central African fabrics articulate conceptions of the afterlife. So I'm incredibly grateful to the Pulitzer Center for the opportunity to return to Cameroon this November to focus on the Ndop cloth of the grass fields, which is home of the Bamileke and Bauman groups. Ndop is at once immediately recognizable and full of variations. It crosses administrative, religious, and ethnic boundaries. It can be found in certain parts of the Anglophone Northwest, among the mostly Christian Bamileke of the West and the Muslim Bamoun across the River Noon. The late African art historian and ethnologist Jean Paul Nautier remarked that the patterns that typify Ndop can be read as, quote, a veritable book in which we decipher numerous messages. This project investigates what's at stake in the various approaches to secure a future for textiles that is also a socio-religious text, its distinctive geometric vocabulary encoding Bamileke and Bauman systems of thought. Caught between tradition and modernity, the fabric of a nation sparks debate about cultural identity and preservation. Some underline the symbolic and sacred nature of the textile. Others privilege expansion and innovation. Classified as a part of Cameroon's national heritage by the Ministry of Arts and Culture in 2020, Ndop has been at the epicenter of diverging concepts of cultural continuance. I will interview cultural stewards promoting the cloth's inclusion in UNESCO's Intangible Cultural Heritage List, local historians, designers creating ready-to-wear garments inspired by Ndop, and the artists themselves, a small group initiated in traditional production of the cloth. I intend to focus on their stories with the belief that those closest to the material who work it with their hands are in a privileged position to speak to it. So this will take me to Baham, just south of Bafoussam, which remains a current site of traditional production. This man's name is Kamwa Simu. He was born sometime around 1925 and learned the art of designing Ndop fabric in his early teens. He's initiated every member of his family into the trade beginning at the age of 7. On a hand-woven undyed cotton, he's drawing the patterns with a mixture of vegetal ink. Simo's motifs are then tightly stitched over with strong raffia thread, which is a meticulous task carried out by women. The tightness of these stitches resists the dye when the cloth is submerged in an indigo bath, so that when the raffia thread is cut off on the right, the space beneath it remains white. Here we can see Solange Hugo to the left, stitching over the lines that Kamwa Simu's traced, and her daughter Sylvie Momo to the right, removing the threads after the dye bath. Historical production involves a codified collaboration between men and women in the north and west regions of the country, a labor-intensive process entailing over 2,500 kilometers of travel over the course of several months. One of my sources, the historian Francine Sonqueng, has traced pre-colonial trade between peoples of different regions. The cultivation of cotton in the extreme north, spinning and weaving in Garawa in the north, the design of the patterns and resist stitching in the grass fields, back to Garawa to be dyed in indigo baths, and finally, returned to the grass fields for finishing and distribution. A single cloth produced this way could cost up to 120,000 CFA, which is approximately 180 euros, in a country where a third of its inhabitants live on less than 2 euros a day. Industrially printed or wax-dyed versions of the fabric imported from Nigeria and elsewhere and sold for a fraction of the cost, as well as the rising threat of Boko Haram in the north, have disrupted this generation's old production chain. Before industrial manufacturing and democratized the fabric, endop was reserved for ceremonial use, notably in funerary rites, worn exclusively by the fawn, king, and his family, members of secret societies, and dignitaries. This is the king of Bazu, wearing a beaded endop tunic in front of an endop wall hanging, sitting on a throne that's been covered with a much older, faded endop decorated with cowrie shells. So you can see recurring motifs in each of these. This is a stylized crocodile, which embodies royal power and fertility. The circle, which actually might be more visible here, with the alternating dotted and empty triangles, which symbolizes the world of the living and the world of the dead. When I lived in the grass fields, I saw these patterns not only on cloth, but also painted on the walls of chiefdoms, carved on royal sculptures, and as well as printed on handbags for sale in the market. Prior to the end of scarification practices within the last generations, these same patterns were embedded in royal women's skin. I bring up this particular point to show that tradition is not static. Rituals and customs change over time. Likewise, art is not produced in a vacuum. A work always reflects the context in which it was created. But what does it mean for these ancestral patterns to be commercialized, more accessible to a wider public, but removed from their mystical dimensions? In the various, often ideologically opposed movements to preserve and valorize this cloth, what will be lost if the know-how of its production dies with Kamwasimu and his family? Essentially, what I'm asking is, where does the meaning-making occur? In the process? Through the material? Through its use? In the patterns themselves, no matter how or where they appear? It is high time to forefront a Cameroonian perspective. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Nailah Barnes. I recently graduated from Spelman College as class valedictorian, having double majored in international studies and French with concentrations in curatorial and cultural studies. I am a Black woman curator, creative, and researcher who has worked in different facets of the art world ecosystem and am deeply interested in the diplomatic power of the arts. In this presentation, I will give an overview of my reporting project, Souls of Our Nations, Race, Gender, and Nationality at the 59th Venice Biennale, the title of which is inspired by the book Soul of a Nation, Art in the Era of Black Power. The Venice Biennale spotlights contemporary artists from around the world who are inspiring about exploring and questioning their nation's souls, who they are, their histories, their futures. Undergirding this project is the reality that platforms highlighting art and culture, such as the Venice Biennale, are fraught with geopolitical issues and elucidate the lack of racial and ethnic inclusion across the industry. The first few slides of this presentation highlight my pre-reporting research and context that are helping me hone my topics and uncover the questions at the heart of my project. I was in the field from October 3rd through 10th and will return this week to continue reporting and writing. I am currently working to refine my specific angles and stories, as we will explore later on in the presentation. So, what is the Venice Biennale? The Venice Biennale is one of the largest art exhibitions in the world, bringing together curators, writers, critics, novelists, musicians, for a celebration of what's going on in contemporary art, the history of art, and the city of Venice. It has occurred biannually, with a few hiccups due to wars and pandemics since 1895. In a more esoteric sense, the Venice Biennale is positioned as a conversation with time and is an opportunity to watch a country find a new identity or reckon with its past. The Biennale consists of 3 parts: a central exhibition organized by the artistic director, in this case, Fida Yamani. Also, national pavilions organized by over 150 countries, each offering an exhibition of one or more artists. You can think of these as mini museums located all around Venice. And then there are also independently organized exhibitions tagged by the Biennale as official collateral exhibitions. The 59th Venice Biennale is particularly notable for a few different reasons. It's titled Milk of Dreams and is centered around three themes: the representation of bodies and their metamorphoses, the relationship between individuals and their technologies, and the connections between bodies and our Earth. Although the chief curator, Fida Yamani's creative direction and mission for the 59th Venice Biennale includes more women and non-binary people's contributions to the contemporary art scene than ever before, I have found that the structure of the Venice Biennale at base prevents proportionate representation of women artists from the global South. My pre-reporting has shown that there is a palpable dearth of sub-Saharan African nations presenting this year. Only 5% of the pavilions that I mentioned are sub-Saharan African countries, while these countries make up over 20% of our world. So we see that disconnect there. While the number is certainly an increase from previous years, it is by no means representative of the breadth and diversity of 54 countries' artistic cultures. Additionally, though African nations are more present at the Venice Biennale than ever, they are not always presenting on their own terms. For example, Namibia's National Pavilion was curated by a group of individuals from Italy, and the artists who were featured were Italian and Chinese and didn't have any meaningful engagement with art from Namibia. Given this dearth of representation, misrepresentation, and my personal positionality, I am very interested in how African-descended women artists and curators are navigating this space. With specificity, I ponder, how are the sub-Saharan African women participating in the Venice Biennale this year thinking about their place at the Biennale and contending with themes of inclusion in their work? Secondly, are the artists representing countries with histories of institutionalized racism, sexism, imperialism, and colonialism, contending with those troubled histories directly in their oeuvre? And relatedly to this question is a musing about whether they should even feel an obligation to do the former. Lastly, is there a sense of solidarity amongst the women presenting their work at the Biennale this year? My pre-reporting, those P's, and initial time in the field have led to some very interesting finds related to my final inquiry. In pondering whether there is a sense of solidarity amongst the women presenting their work at the Venice Biennale this year, I was drawn to a particular component of artist Simone Lee's exhibition for the US Pavilion. Along with an amazing conglomerate of Black women creatives, Simone Lee organized a convening of Black women artists and intellectuals from across the African diaspora for a 3-day symposium she called Loophole of Retreat, Venice. The conceptual framework for the conference is drawn from the 1861 autobiography of Harriet Jacobs, a formerly enslaved woman who, for 7 years after her escape, lived in a crawl space she described as a loophole of retreat. Jacobs claimed this site as simultaneously a protective enclosure and a space for enacting practices of freedom. Loophole of Retreat Venice was a refuge within the Venice Biennale for Black women from around the world. The 3-day symposium comprised dialogue, performances, and presentations centered on Black women's intellectual and creative labor. It was an incubator for reimagining how African-descended and global Southern women's voices are represented in the art world. Loophole of Retreat felt at once like attending an HBCU homecoming, a gathering of close family and friends from near and far to love on one another and have a fantastic time. And it also felt like being a guest at the Grammys, surrounded by the people who are defining our culture and who I admire very much. That juxtaposition of belly laughs paired with blue check Instagram statuses was unlike anything I have ever experienced. We all are, in the words of one of the presenters, Ngara Kaduma, fiercely and truly loving Black women and are endeavoring to give voice and platforms to our intellectual and artistic labor. So, following our conference here in Washington, D.C., I will return to Europe to follow up with participants, explore the exhibition further, reflect, write, and continue developing this project. You can stay in touch with me and up to date on my reporting by following me on Instagram, by checking out my website, which is launching soon, and sending me an email as well. Thank you for your time.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you to our panelists for their wonderful presentations, and thank you all for making it through this. We're last. Our panelists have been amazing. They've talked about some truly amazing things, and it's been enlightening. This entire weekend has been truly amazing. And our film called Philippine Father has been, personally for me, one of the most emotionally and physically demanding experiences of my life, but it has also been an immensely gratifying experience. These two people here are some of my closest friends now, and I'm truly grateful to be here. And I'm also very honored to be sharing a panel with such amazingly accomplished individuals. Never did I imagine that I would be sharing a panel with actual Oscar winners. And so here we are. This man. In June of this year, Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos, he is affectionately known as Bongbong or BBM, was elected as the president of the Philippines. He won this election by a massive margin. He won 58% of the total voter share. The next closest person was Leni Robredo, who won only 28% of it. Along with being a former senator, he won this election on the platform of creating a stronger Philippines under a strong leader. But that's not it. That's not just it. He is also the son of former dictator Ferdinand Marcos Sr., who ruled the Philippines for almost 20 years and placed it under martial law for almost a decade. And after prolonged protests, he was exiled to Hawaii in the 80s, where he later died. The impact of his rule is felt to this day in the Philippines, and his legacy has forever divided the Filipino people.
So we went to the Philippines to do a little bit of reporting, and we talked to a lot of people, but I want to talk about two people in particular. Here is Dr. Walden Bello, who at the time was vice presidential candidate, activist, and scholar. He went to Princeton University, got his PhD in sociology, and he was also exiled from the Philippines for his activism. When he ran for vice president, he was running on a socialist platform. And when I went to the Philippines, I asked him, why are people supporting BBM? And he said that the history of the Philippines of the dictatorship had been whitewashed and replaced with this nostalgia for a strongman, which becomes relevant later. The other person I talked to in our documentary was my aunt, Tita Grace. And Tita Grace was interesting because I asked her what she thought about BBM. But before I get to that, our family history with BBM is a little fraught. When I asked her if she liked BBM, she said yes, but I don't like his father. And I said, why? Well, his father had the dictatorship, and her father, my grandfather, was murdered during the dictatorship when he wanted to expose government corruption. Yet, she supports BBM because she thinks that BBM will change the country and bring something new, and he wants to resurrect his father's legacy. And so one of the main takeaways, and I know this is only just a small sample and it's anecdotal, but progressives can be successfully courted by authoritarians. My aunt was a follower of Walden Bello, and she at the time called herself a socialist, but then she became a BBM supporter. And the question is BBM truly different? Well, it might be worth noting that Walden Bello, I had a picture of him, there we go. Walden Bello was arrested about 2 months after our interview. And so, is he truly different? But I will now pass it on to Evan.
So a little bit about our process. This started as a political film following the election and the different players, as Mike and Fida were talking about. It very quickly became a personal journey. a pivot to a personal journey, a lot of P's in that. So we had to adapt on the fly. We were going to, initially when we were in the Philippines, we were going to go to a northern region, a rural region, and cover what's called Cordillera Day, which is an indigenous celebration of resistance to authoritarianism, especially the Marcos regime. This is a poster of that. While we were en route to the event, we were informed that it had been canceled, and you can't really just leave and come back to the Philippines, or at least we can't. So we had to adapt on the fly. At the same time, we were learning a lot about Mike's family. We're spending time with Mike's family. We're learning about his own personal history. The man in this picture is Manny Flores, Mike's father, who passed away a couple years ago. He went to the same military program, cadet program, as Ferdinand Marcos. He was there in the Philippines during the dictatorship, but unlike a lot of his military colleagues, he was an anti-Marcos activist and a writer. And this was all information that was new to Mike and new to us, and we were learning it along the way as we spoke with Mike's family. So we decided to make a change, sort of out of necessity and sort of out of instinct. We followed the story that we had, and we ended up in this sleepy little town of Santa Fe, about 5.5 hours north of Manila, which is where Manny Flores grew up. And we spoke with family members of Mike's. We sort of traced Mike's father, traced his footsteps. I should mention, this is a big part of the story, that Mike's relationship with his father was difficult, and the man was abusive and troubled, and complex, like many people are. And so we were learning about him through Mike's eyes, through the eyes of Mike's family, while also following the political story as best we could. And there were multiple parallels that were kind of interesting between the political story, and the personal. They're here. I won't read them because we're running out of time, and I want to show the clip that we have. So a lot of struggles. Happy to talk to anybody in the Q&A. It's difficult to make a personal film. It's difficult to make a film about your friend or yourself, about trauma, and to be in the edit room for a long time. But we're going to show this clip real quick. This is like a sizzle reel. It's supposed to show kind of the flavor. We're still working on the film, but we certainly hope you enjoy it.
So check-ins, 8:30 in the mornings?
Okay, even on weekends?
Even on weekends, sorry.
I don't get to sleep in.
I'm going to the Philippines now. I'm gonna miss you. Do you girls know why I'm going to the Philippines?
I don't know, I forgot the name.
I'm actually gonna go follow the footsteps of my dad.
My dad, Manny, gave life to me and gave me the gift to enjoy life later on. I don't know. My dad, Manny, was a complicated ass man who abused me but also loved me at the same time, and I'm fucking thankful for it.
Like my dad, I'm often trapped in the past. I'm often trapped with my dad. I'm often trapped in Iraq. And I've dealt with most of the Iraq stuff. But it's the dad stuff that once in a while in the back of my brain just... And like, I just don't want to be with my kids. And they don't deserve that. So I feel like ultimately this will help the next generation.
This project is, in a way, kind of reconciling my relationship with my dad. We're gonna go to where my dad's family's from, and I get to discover, like, how did that environment shape my grandmother, which shaped my dad? And we got to go back to the mountains and be like, these are the hills in which intergenerational trauma started for my family.
And then, si Papang.
Thank you. And of course, thank you to Pulitzer Center, to Linda, everybody. Very happy to be here. Very grateful for.
Even on weekends, sorry.
I don't get to.
thank you so much, panelists. Maybe one more round of applause for good measure. I also forgot to mention during my intro, I did want to give a special mention to Linda Winslow, who's here, one of our Pulitzer Center board members, and someone who has been an amazingly helpful advisor to our Columbia documentary students. So thank you, Linda, for being here. And all right, one last time, I will ask, any questions for one another, panelists?
Okay, Lily, so it was really wonderful to see that in the end-up cloth there is raffia. And raffia is a plant that is indigenous to Madagascar, right? We can chat about it. So Simone Lee, the artist that I spoke about, who's representing the United States at the Venice Biennale, uses raffia a lot in her work as well. So just wondering if you could tell us maybe a bit more about raffia and its significance within the textiles and just kind of chat about that material.
Raffia is used in a lot of Central African textiles. I am really curious to hear from the artists how they think of the way material takes part in the meaning making. We were talking yesterday about like form and content and the way that choice of material will participate in the deeper significance of the work. And raffia is found throughout Central Africa, and raffia wine is often used for ceremonial uses. I should preface all of this by saying I don't know yet. This is part of my question. I'll leave it at that. Yeah. But I love that. I think our projects speak to each other in these very interesting ways, and I'll have to look into the artist's use of raffia.
I have a question for Gabby and the Seasons team. You're making a story which is deeply personal about a mother and a daughter, along with trying to tell a larger story about the dying out of a farming culture. How do you choose, or rather, how do you incorporate both aspects of this? Because we're trying to tell a political story through the lens of our friend Mike. It's a personal story, but also a very political story. How do you bring these two seemingly disparate things together, and how do you overcome those challenges?
I'll start, and then Gabby can add her thoughts as well. We, as you probably have, we started with a rough cut that was probably 40 or 45 minutes that contained a lot of information and a lot of different narrative threads, and eventually we came to the conclusion that in order to effectively distribute our film that we would have to narrow it down, and that's what we did. And we ended up with what is now a 22-minute film that is almost entirely about the family that runs the farm, their immigrant story, and about the question of whether uni will take over the farm. So while the action of farming is sort of the vessel used to tell that story, it doesn't ever overtake the significance of the family story. So it definitely took a backseat.
Thanks for your question. I agree with what Michael said, and I think we established not early on, but somewhere in the middle, that there was going to be an A story and there was going to be a B story, and they were going to complement each other. And I'm personally a really fan of subtle metaphors. I think we all learned here as journalists to show and not tell. And so the story that's a bit more complicated about the lack of diversity in farming, the story of the immigrant story, we just chose to show that as opposed to really delve into it. because there's far more nuance to their relationship and their farm that deserved more airtime. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Questions from the audience now? Oh, Mike, go ahead.
So this question's for Lily. With the fabrics and the patterns, they're very familiar to other cultures throughout the globe in terms of like spiritual significance. Can you talk about the spiritual significance of the fabrics in the culture you were studying?
One thing that has been really interesting, there isn't like a comprehensive index of what these patterns mean. I've been reading a lot from different Cameroonian art historians, ethnologists, different cultural actors. There's recently been a book published that within the different essays, there are like contradictory interpretations of exactly what specific patterns mean. So I don't think that I'm necessarily in the best place to be the one who says like this means, this geometric form symbolizes that. I mentioned a few, but those were the ones that were sort of universally represented as that. Yeah, I guess that's, this cloth also, I didn't really get into this, but there are sort of 3 different major variations. It does cross these administrative and ethnic boundaries, and it really highlights how a lot of, so much of sub-Saharan Africa, the boundaries are the results of like arbitrary colonial and post-colonial decisions. I have lost sight of your question, Michael, and I'm so sorry. Someone take this microphone away from me. Yeah, I think it's interesting. We're sort of in a similar position of when you haven't left for reporting and you're not quite sure what you're gonna find yet, but I'm interested in hearing the different ways that people are thinking about this because there's this movement to say this is an integral part of our culture and it needs to be saved. It's going to die in the next generation if no one does anything, but there are conflicting viewpoints in how that should be done.
Okay, sure. I have a question for the Philippine father team. I've never had the experience as a filmmaker of making a film about someone who's also on the production team. What has that experience been like, and what challenges, if any, has that presented?
Yeah, so I'll take one aspect of the filmmaking process. I originally did not expect to be part of the film, and for months my advisors were saying, you have to be part of the film, and I must have had a dream one night and told me to be in the movie, and I woke up one morning and I said, yes, I'm gonna be in this movie. And at the same time I was working with Evan, and we had the questions like, oh, well, how am I gonna appear on the screen? And it looks like throughout the movie that I'm talking to the camera, but really what it is me talking to Evan. Evan would ask me questions, and it was basically, the movie's a love letter to Evan, just me opening up about my love life and my father life with him. And so that's kind of been our filmmaking process in the first person.
I want to just add I love you too, Mike. I want to say that it's interesting because you have to wear a lot of different hats, right? Like, and so Mike, that was one of the struggles we listed, was having a co-creator as also a character, because it's like sometimes Fida and I would be talking behind the scenes, Mike's doing an interview, right? We're filming, we're running the like all the gear and stuff, and it's like damn, we want him to ask this question, like why doesn't he? And it's like, he's a co-creator. You want him to do something, but in that role, it's like he's a character. We can't guide him. Like, we're not gonna come in and say, hey, Mike, like, do this and this and this. So it's like finding which roles. It's also true that I'm gonna speak for Mike. Like, it was very hard for Mike to be in the editing process of this film because you're looking at yourself, and it was hard for us too. He's a very good friend of ours. And so it's hard to just be staring at yourself and going through trauma and like hearing yourself. And we all think we sound like idiots when we talk. And so you're in the editing room for months at a time. So it's just, I mean, we could talk all day about this, but it's rough. We're still figuring it out.
All right, now audience questions. Head back here, Danielle.
Hello. First of all, I want to say all of your work was extremely impactful. I really gained a lot from your reporting and your pre-reporting and all your experiences. A lot of your work, this is kind of an open-ended question to any of the panelists. Your work focuses on art and identity, but it also focuses on family and community and growing together in a subsection of our world. I wanted to ask, how do you address this multi-layered aspect of reporting of, you know, I'm dealing with this topic, this issue, but I'm also dealing with this community. How do you address that multi-layered topic in your reporting?
So we walked in thinking we were going to do a story about authoritarianism, and a lot of it had to do with just interviewing people along the way and asking them what their experiences were, where they're coming from, why they believe what they believe, and how history has shaped them. I think just continually asking questions about yourself and the people you know is integral.
I think one of our favorite sections and seasons is this 1 or 2 minute kind of black and white archival sequence where you learn about the family's history. And it was always important for us to dig a little deeper. Like you can see Nevia and her daughter working on the farm, but we wanted to somehow put on screen, you know, their really remarkable journey. Their family is originally from North Korea, actually, and that in and of itself is an entire film. So weaving that context in, I think, was something that we were constantly thinking about, and at times received a little bit of pushback, but we kept it, and I think the film is much stronger for it.
Hi, I'm going to try to phrase this in a 1-2 punch because it's for 2 people, the season's teams and Nailah. So, I love, first of all, your presentations. I love how it depicted how people of color are entering more white spaces and taking up that space in beautiful ways. And I'm also looking at the intersectionality between film. And as I saw both of your presentations, one of the things that stuck out to me for the seasons team, I quickly recall the film Minari. Did that have any play on what you guys were working on? And for Nailah, did the film Black is King have anything to do, or did you touch on that at any time in your process?
You want to start?
Thanks for your question, and you're really well watched. You watch a lot of films. When I began reporting, Minari came out, and I was so sad. I went to the program director. I was like, we got scooped. But luckily, it's a narrative film. It's fiction, and I don't remember if you watched it, but I refused to watch it because I didn't want it to inform the way I was telling the story or dictate, or make me stage things or something. But it definitely, I was a little disgruntled at first, but I was then relieved in a way that there's an audience for this and that there are stories like this starting to come out. So yeah, it was a cool moment, actually. Thanks for asking.
I'll just really quickly add, I did watch the film, but I made a concerted effort to wait until we were deeper into our process because I didn't want it to influence it too much.
Thank you so much for that question. I hadn't thought about Black is King informing my research until you just brought it up, and it's really poignant because in the way that Beyonce, as a Black American woman, is tracing and trying to find and trying to give voice to her roots and where she belongs in the world ancestrally, but has never lived in Senegal or anywhere else in West Africa, is something that I have grappled with personally, and have found that other Black American artists who are sort of at the pinnacle of this world and trying to create space for sub-Saharan African artists, our positionality as American gives us a lot of privilege to create these spaces, and Simone Lee was able to collaborate with the ICA Boston and the State Department and all these other big institutional pillars to create a space for other artists who maybe don't have that same support and backing to come to Venice and participate in the Venice Biennale, but it's still a sort of American first prerogative, though it's happening internationally and on an international sort of circuit. And then I was also thinking about Black Panther and how I've spoken with friends who are from sub-Saharan Africa and critiqued that the majority of the cast are Black American actors and actresses, or Black British or Black French, et cetera, though the film is about and is pulling from and creating this sort of mystical West African influenced new society. It's really, really interesting and gets into a project that I'm doing in Senegal later on about Black Americans' search for homecoming and belonging outside of the United States, and how challenging it is to position ourselves and come to terms with that privilege and that burden.
Maybe one more question of Washington Weekend 2022.
That's a high bill to live up to. Okay, so bear with me. It's like a couple comments and then a question. One, I appreciated all of your presentations, really lovely to listen to, and super inspiring. Two, Mike, just I guess formal thank you for, I guess, being vulnerable with all of us, especially in talking about the process, and even being open to having that be videotaped and talked about. Really appreciate that as well. But my question is kind of, I think so much of my appreciation for all of your presentations comes from this feeling of you guys really represented the idea that like journalism doesn't have to be fully objective all of the time. And I feel like that's something that I've struggled with a lot, because that's a lot of the criticism that I get. But how did you guys kind of, I almost feel like it's impossible to have completely objective journalism. But how did you kind of balance the subjectivity of exploring art and identity and like your own thoughts about it with putting forward a story that would be received like truthfully as can be, kind of thing?
Okay, I'm gonna start for a second, because I started teaching reporting this semester to students, and yeah, we traditionally have to like shove objectivity down their throats, but I think that, maybe this is controversial to say, I think I bring certain aspects to the table when I look at a search story, just from my own upbringing and background, and I can't forget that, actually, and I don't want to forget that, and it's going to bring out certain sensibilities when I look at and convey a story. And so, yeah, it was actually a joy. Like I said at the beginning, I gravitate towards stories of identity and belonging, and that comes from my own family's immigrant story. So that's why I really leaned into the beauty of that in Seasons.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, with the Philippine Father, we knew that objectivity would be hard to achieve, but we definitely try to go for fairness. And one of the ways we try to be fair was talking to people across the political spectrum. I'll tell one really quick story. Before we went to the Philippines, we tried talking to as many journalists in the Philippines to get the lay of the land. A lot of journalists had been killed over the last few years. And the only journalist we could talk to was a government journalist. And I posed to him a question from kind of a fairness perspective. And I asked, with this new president, will historical killings continue? 30,000 people had been killed. And the government journalist just went, "It remains to be seen." And it was one of those moments in the movie where it was so revealing to know the other perspective that only happened because we try to be fair.
I really appreciate that question because art at base is so subjective, and our appreciation of it and even trying to attribute moral terms to it, like good or bad, is extremely difficult. And we had a conversation at dinner or at lunch last night that really helped me realize this across mediums, and I'm looking at Gabby because she helped me understand it. But I asked, what's the difference between journalism, filmmaking, and artistic filmmaking? And the response was, it's not cut and dry. It's not like math or physics where this is just what it is. It's the people at the highest echelons, or the professors at Columbia Journalism School that get to decide what's journalism and what's art. And it's the same for visual art as well, in terms of what's high art, what's museum quality art, who are fine artists, and does photography fall into that canon? And so all of that to say, it's really complicated, and a part of my mission is to bring more people into the fold in terms of getting rid of those binaries and those really exclusive definitions of what belongs and what doesn't. So I encourage more conversations about this, but it is tough.
Lily, did you want to say something before we wrap up?
Yeah, I don't. Okay.
Now is the time.
That was the time. Speaker forever. Yeah, I really, really appreciate that question. I think it's sort of a perfect note to end on. Throughout this conference, I think so many people have had me consider the way that there's there's no perception without point of view. It would be more dishonest to pretend like we're just these bodiless eyeballs instead of considering what's informing the way we look at things. And yeah, I've been really grateful for the way everyone here has just brought so much critical, yes. You got it. Everyone's been really considered in the way they are approaching their subject matters, and it's been, I feel like I've learned so much from all of you, so thank you.
Thank you. Congratulations to each and every one of you. Thank you for closing out our Washington Weekend panels. One more round of applause just for the whole weekend. And while I have everyone's attention, and before I hand the microphone over to Kim, I just wanted to say a huge thank you to each and every one of you for your attention, your enthusiasm, and energy throughout the weekend. And I also just wanted to quickly thank our Pulitzer Center team, Mark at the camera, who filmed all of these panels for us. Daniel is somewhere collecting content right there. Lucy was our designer, made amazing logos like this, made our tote bags. Ash, right back there, he was our AV expert, and I could not have done literally any of this, so thank you, Ash. Anne, one of my campus consortium teammates. Grace, an amazing intern at the Pulitzer Center who is taking photos. Isha is our reporting fellow program intern who joined right before Washington Weekend and just totally put everything into this event, so thank you. And then Michaela, another campus teammate who helped Isha and Grace on the scavenger hunt and on so many things. And then John, thank you for being here, for just asking questions, participating so much. And then, of course, Kim, who helped me so much with everything. I think I got everyone. And Libby!
And again, I just want to second Libby. Thank you to all the reporting fellows. Thank you to all the Pulitzer Center team. And thank you for a great presentation right here. So we are going to go outside in a few minutes and take the group photo. But before we do, just a few notes. And I know some of you have yet to travel. Some of you are still working on your projects. But I want to just say something to those of you who have finished your projects, and that is that we have all so enjoyed working with you and getting to know you, and you are always part of the Pulitzer Center family. We have a very active and increasingly becoming more active alum group, so we want you to participate. We plan virtual reunions, we plan in-person reunions. You're all part of the Facebook group, so keep looking at that page, keep posting, keep sharing work you do. We hope that you'll take part in info sessions at your schools, sort of sharing your experience for new applicants. And we also want to do the most to help you share your work and bring it out into the world. So we're going to encourage you to do campus visits. We're going to encourage you to do film screenings. We're going to encourage you to talk to the public about your work. And let us know how we can help you. We're here to do that, and it's a very important part of the work we do. Also, you've heard some amazing stories that have not yet appeared on the Pulitzer Center website. So keep checking the reporting fellow pages to see some of the work that's been shared this weekend. And don't leave without your certificate. We didn't find everyone during the break, and we want you to have those certificates. Best, though, pick them up after the group photo. So when we leave here, we're just going to go out those doors and take the picture. And this has been so meaningful to all of us since we haven't been able to do this in person for so long. It's just been this wonderful experience. And safe travels.